What is going on, Trash Talkers? We're back with another episode for you. Today's video, we're going to give you our starts and sits for the fantasy football week 1 of the NFL season. All that and much more coming your way right now! All right, Trash Talkers, before we get into today's YouTube video, I need you guys to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into today's video. All right, Nick, well, we are here. Week 1 of the NFL season is upon us, and we have a special guest with us, Matt Vitale of Fantasy 4-Pack. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. Looking forward to giving some of your listeners some fantasy advice, and hopefully we can see one of you guys over on our show to kind of give us some of your sports knowledge. It's always good to get some different views on things.
Absolutely. So before we get into today's video and all the content that we have for you guys, why don't you talk about your channel a little bit and where people can find you?
Yeah, so our YouTube channel is the Fantasy 4-Pack. It's me, myself, our host Ian Power, my other roommate Frankie Santiago. Basically, we just go through the fantasy season, starting with usually around draft time, talking about how the draft will impact different players, different teams, fantasy outlook, covering different formats, standard, best ball, half point, and just kind of giving you guys these takes that you might not hear from the big mainstream people. Because good example, Tyler Lockett. Everyone was in on Tyler Lockett this year. Me and the rest of the guys here were very anti him because of his boom or bust potential. So it's just a great way of giving people some extra advice for their drafts.
Excellent. I mean, listen, I have listened to you guys for fantasy for a long time, way back when, knowing you for as long as I have. We were in a fantasy league in of ourselves, and I do remember coming in second to last place. So it's got, it's kind of good to have you here and giving us your fantasy football knowledge, and I appreciate you making the time once again. All right, so let's get started. Let's get rolling into today's video, and the first thing we have are the quarterbacks, the almighty quarterbacks for fantasy football. And one player that you might be looking to start would be Trevor Lawrence. And you guys want to talk a little bit about why we want to start Trevor?
Simple. They're playing Houston. Houston's basically a college team, and Trevor Lawrence played pretty well in college. So I like to see him playing against a team that just gave up one of their best corners to the New Orleans Saints. So he's got basically nothing coming against him. There's no threat on the defense that I'm worried about, and he has some solid receivers out there. Marvin Jones Jr., DJ Chark. As much as I'm down on him this year, he's still a quality red zone threat. James Robinson can still catch the ball even though they lost Travis Etienne. Like, there's a lot to like this matchup on the Jag side of the ball specifically.
Yeah, I like Trevor Lawrence a lot myself. I think that when you look at the defensive side of the ball for the Houston Texans, they just traded away Bradley Roby to the New Orleans Saints. And then you look at the pass rush. Shaq Lawson was just traded to the New York Jets. The pass rush getting to Trevor Lawrence is non-existent. And then the guys that the receivers for the Jags have to go up against are not good. So when you look at everything that's playing for the offense of the Jaguars, they're going to have plenty of time to make reads and get passes to those wide receivers. I think that this is going to be a very pass-heavy offense, especially in week 1, and I really like Trevor Lawrence this week.
Yeah, I like Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to put on a show. And listen, under head coach Urban Meyer, I think he's going to have some real potential. They're going to run a college-style system where he's going to be able to flourish, and I believe that Trevor Lawrence is handpicked for this challenge, and he's going to do really well against the Houston Texans. All right, next up for our sit of the week, we have Justin Herbert versus the Washington football team.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where a lot of people probably drafted Justin Herbert in the middle rounds thinking that he was just going to be a lock-in play guy, but there's a reason he was going in those later rounds. His team's a little still unproven. We're not sure who the number 2 receiver is in town. Keenan Allen's getting older. They just lost Hunter Henry. And they're going against one of the best defenses in the NFL in the Washington football team. So I won't be too surprised if this pass rush is getting to him all game. I mean, it's one of the lowest totals on the slate, coming up with a 45 over under. So even Vegas is not really in on this game being a high scoring affair. You got two great defenses going against each other. I could see this one just being an absolute rock fight with both defenses just stopping and just a lot of 3-and-outs. So for me, I don't see the great. There's not a lot of upside with Justin Herbert. He still has the amazing talent to give you a good floor, but if you're going late quarterback and you're trying to make sure you get a good start, I would probably look elsewhere like Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Justin Herbert is probably going to have good game overall, but as far as fantasy goes, he's just not going to have the output. I think Austin Eckler is going to be a big part of it, and it's just going to be a lot of short yardage plays from the running backs. And I think that it's just not going to be a high scoring game, like you said. So I just don't think Justin Herbert's going to have the big plays coming in this one. I don't think that he's going to have a lot of open targets that he's going to get easy looks to. So I just think things are going to work against Justin Herbert in this week.
Listen, this pains me because I'm a big Justin Herbert guy. I've always been a Justin Herbert guy, even when he was in college. And seeing what he did last year really had me high on him. But I understand that the Washington football team, their defense is no joke. And if we're going to look at this from the point of view of you got to make a start or a sit, Justin Herbert's going to be sitting for me. All right, let's move over to the running backs. And taking a look at those running backs, you might be interested in some of the later running backs that you take, not the Ezekiel Elliott's, Alvin Kamara's of the world, but how about the James Robinsons of the world? Matt, why don't you talk to us a little bit about James Robinson?
James Robinson, he was a darling for me last year. I pulled the trade after a couple of boom weeks, and he really paid out for me. And this year, I was saddened to see that they drafted Travis Etienne, especially with how much need they have on this team elsewhere. They could have put anything else there, and I felt it would have been a good pick. But Etienne had a great skill set that they thought that was going to work with Urban Meyer's system. He's gone, and James Robinson should inherit this backfield. Some people are a little down on him because of Carlos Hyde, but we've seen Carlos Hyde for years. He's a vet. He's there for depth. And I think that they're just going to use James Robinson as the undrafted rookie that he was, just basically pummel him with carries because at the end of the day, they have Travis Etienne for next year and onward. So once again, he's going against Houston. It's a terrible defense. They're going to be able to score at will against him. He does get some passing work. He's a huge volume back, and I think he could really help people out this week.
Yeah, I like that last point a lot. I think that James Robinson is going to be heavily utilized towards the end of the game, especially in that garbage time when we know that the Jacksonville Jaguars have this game secured. They're just going to want to run the clock out. They don't want Trevor Lawrence in a situation where he could get hurt when he doesn't need to be on the field making plays. I think James Robinson is going to take advantage of that weak defensive line, and he's going to be able to get some nice open holes. He's going to have a lot of carries towards the end of the game in the fourth quarter. I really like James Robinson's potential this week.
Yeah, I mean, people were down on James Robinson from what they saw in the offensive line during the preseason, but I'll caution you and say that 3 of their 5 starting offensive linemen didn't play most of the preseason. They were just getting rested and just getting healthy for the start of the regular season. Those guys are absolute maulers, and they create massive holes against this nerfed up Houston Texans defense. So at the end of the day, James Robinson's going to have gaping holes that he's going to be able to run through, and he's going to be the stabilizing force for this Jaguars offense in what should be a relatively easy game. Next up, we have DAndre Swift versus the San Francisco 49ers. Matt, why don't you tell us why you're a little down on DAndre Swift?
There was a plethora of reasons coming into the season. We actually have a bet over on our show about which team is going to be worse, the Lions or the Texans. I lean towards the Texans, but the Lions are going to be right there racing towards the bottom. Dan Campbell, where he's definitely a hype machine, and I like him as a head coach, but we're yet to see what he can do in the NFL realm. Swift, amazing talent, but they just brought in Jamal Williams, and he's a prolific pass catcher, which is what we were looking for with Swift. And if he's going to be losing that pass catching volume, the rushing upside is not great for a team that's going to be losing pretty heavily against one of my favorite defenses, the 49ers. They're one of my top picks this week. Snap them up in your drafts. If for some reason you haven't drafted yet, snap them up. But seriously, Swift is a guy that I like later in the season. This week 1 matchup is going to be ugly.
Yeah, I think DeAndre Swift's got a lot working against him, and it really stems from the offensive line. It's not in a good spot right now, and even with the addition of Penny Sewell, he's on one side, but now you're missing your other bookend, Taylor Decker. And when you look at that side, that's where Nick Bosa plays. He is fully healthy, and he is going to have a very easy time getting to that backfield. I think that DeAndre Swift, on the limited snap count he's already going to get, I think that he is going to have very few opportunities to make plays and get points for your team. I just think that this is not the week to start DeAndre Swift, and if you have a better option, you need to look towards that option.
Our viewers know that Nick doesn't like Nick Bosa, so to give him any credit whatsoever is, just one of those few miracles that we have. But in all seriousness, DeAndre Swift, he's already dealing with injuries. He's in a bad situation. He's on a team that is really going to be considered the number one overall pick in the next year's draft. And I believe at this point, the Lions aren't going to be running the ball because they're going to be playing from behind so much. And Matt, as you talked about, if he's losing that receiving upside to Jamal Williams, what's the point of even having this guy? So I think later down the season, down the line, he's going to really show his potential and what he can do. But right now, especially with the loss of Taylor Decker, it's a big no for me. All right, next up, we go over to the wide receivers, and let's take a look at Robby Anderson versus the Jets. Matt, why don't you tell us why this is a start?
Well, Robby Anderson is a receiver I've liked for years now. Really wanted to see him break out, but unfortunately, he started his career with Adam Gase, and we have noticed that pretty much everyone gets an Adam Gase bump. Tannehill got it. Robby Anderson got it his first year with Carolina. Now Darnold should come over and hopefully get that bump too. And even if he's still just the Darnold we've seen before, Darnold was able to produce some of Robby Anderson's best games. And he's going against the Jets. So you get that revenge juice in there. You get the Adam Gase bump. You get the fact that Robby Anderson's just a great receiver. And you could be getting this guy in the 7th, 8th round, and he should be a lock-in flex for most people. Maybe a wide receiver 3 if you're deep at running back. But yeah, I don't see a reason why Robby Anderson doesn't just go off in this game to kind of shove it in the Jets' face along with Darnold.
Yeah, Robby Anderson's going to have a very easy time with that depleted secondary that the New York Jets have, and it's going to be a really good game. When you look at the preseason that Sam Darnold had, he heavily targeted Robby Anderson. That connection is alive and well from their days with New York, and I think that it's going to continue, especially in this game. They're both looking to make a statement against the New York Jets, and I think that especially in the red zone, Robby Anderson's going to be getting those looks. I think he's going to have a tremendous amount of opportunities, and he's going to have a very big week 1.
Yeah, listen, I'm high on Robby Anderson. I have been in all of my drafts. I look for him toward the later rounds, and I believe he's an absolute steal. He's arguably the wide receiver 1 on his team. You can argue about DJ Moore, but at this point, I think Robby Anderson and his connection with Sam Darnold is really going to come to fruition and really put him on the pedestal that the Panthers are looking for that wide receiver 1. I like it in a revenge game against the Jets, so Robby Anderson, definitely start him if you have him. Next up, we have Kenny Golladay versus the Denver Broncos.
I love talking about how much I don't like Kenny G this year. Kenny G, the receiver. Love him. His routes are so crisp and clean. He knows how to play his position so well. Problem is, hurt receivers can't play up to their full potential. And we saw last year this nagging thigh injury was just with him all year, and it just kept him out. And then now it's creeping back up again, and he hasn't even taken a snap for the Giants. Plus, they still have Daniel Jones. I was a Daniel Jones truther last year that he would have the bounce back, but for some reason this man is made of turnovers. He is elite when it comes to turnovers. So it's hard for him to get the ball out to Kenny G when he's throwing it to the other team or fumbling it. And Von Miller's back, and I expect Bradley Chubb and Von Miller to be getting after Danny Dimes all game. So I just don't see the upside with this one. Kenny G's one. If I somehow had to draft him because he fell that late, he's sitting on my bench until I know that he's healthy to go.
It's not even the injuries that really concern me about Kenny G. It's really the defensive backs that the Denver Broncos have. They just drafted Patrick Surtain, and they got Kyle Fuller from the Chicago Bears once he was released. But then they already had Bryce Callahan, and they got Ronald Darby from the Washington football team. They have 4 CB1s on this roster, and they're going to be rotating them in and out against Kenny G, so they stay at 100%. I think that he's just going to have a very tough time, especially with Kadarius Toney being injured, plus you have Evan Ingram not playing. I just think the opportunities for Kenny G are going to be very limited, especially with that pass rush you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones hasn't had a lot of time to work with Kenny G, and at this point, he's going to stick with what he knows. Saquon Barkley is back. They're going to get him into the mix, and you're going to really focus on getting Sterling Shepard and all these other receivers that have been there and have worked with Danny. They're going to get him situated. They're going to get him right, but it's all going to be for naught because the Denver Broncos defense is going to be swarming this entire offense left, right, center, and every other which way. I believe at the end of the day that the New York Giants are going to be one of those teams that really struggle to put up points and even put up yards. I think that we can see the Denver Broncos defense really, really crash in, and they're going to let the league know and put them on notice. They are here for a long time. All right. Let's move over to the tight ends where we talk about Logan Thomas versus the Los Angeles Chargers.
Logan Thomas, he was a great pickup for me last year. This is one thing we preach on the show. When you look at the data between tight ends, it's usually the top three guys we always know that go early in every draft. Getting them is valuable because then you're basically just winning that position for everyone else. If you're not getting those three, you better wait and just grab someone late who has some kind of upside. And that's exactly what you're getting with Logan Thomas. Fitzmagic could just come out and just have a Fitzmagic game any game. We can never really predict them. Usually they're earlier in the year for him though. So I like this one is an opportunity for him to really work in and provide that blanket for Fitzpatrick as he gets accustomed to this new offense. And like I said, Logan Thomas just proved that he can handle that workload. He can work like a higher caliber tight end. So he is one that I think is actually kind of a sneaky pick because the Chargers defense is legit. And I've seen some people kind of shying away from him, but if you're going late on tight end, it's hard to pass up a guy who gets the amount of volume he was getting last year.
You know, Logan Thomas was actually a guy I was down on coming into the season, but after the injury to Curtis Samuel, him being out, I think it's not going to be Diami Brown who takes that spot. I think Logan Thomas is going to be the guy that gets those targets. I think that he is still a big part of this offense. He's somebody Ryan Fitzpatrick has been working with all preseason, and that connection has already been building. To me, Logan Thomas is going to just get more targets than he was expected, and now with Curtis Samuel out, he's going to be a bigger part of the offense overall. I really like him this week against the Los Angeles Chargers, and I am going to expect him to have a big game.
Yeah, I like Logan Thomas back when he was in Virginia Tech and when he transitioned to the tight end position. I was like, oh, here we go again. One of those guys who just can't make it in the NFL and he's trying to salvage his career. Now, he's actually come out and become one of the better tight ends that the NFL has to offer. So I'm really excited for Logan Thomas. And when you take a look at the Los Angeles Chargers, the one thing that they really haven't been able to fix on their defense is the middle section, the linebackers. They have Kenneth Murray, but outside of that, it's a bunch of nobodies that aren't going to be able to really help them. And yes, they're getting Derwin James back, and that's going to be something to watch out for. But this guy hasn't played football in over a year and a half, and we're talking about a guy who needs to come in and lay the wood on one of these massive tight ends, a 6'5", 240 tight end that knows how to run through people. I like Logan Thomas against the Chargers. I think he's going to be just fine. Next up, we have Tyler Higbee versus the Chicago Bears.
Tyler Higbee, he was a definite draft target for me because I like him season long. We saw a little bit of Stafford with Hawkinson, and he definitely wanted to use the position. Downside for Higbee, there's a lot of talent in this passing attack with the Rams, and there's a lot of places he can go with the ball. And I feel like at least for week one, it's probably not going to be Higbee. This is a tough defense they're going against in the Chicago Bears, and the total itself is not great for this game. I basically, when we were talking about through this game on our show, we were going through this one and saying that we're going to stick with, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and the obvious picks. And tight end, it's going to be like if you need it and the waiver wire's dry, maybe you go with him, but he's not one I'm too into this week.
Yeah, Tyler Higbee is a guy I like overall this season, but in this early on in the season, I think that with Matthew Stafford, it's just not going to click. I think Matthew Stafford has always been a big wide receiver quarterback. He's always loved that position more. And towards the end, when he didn't have the receivers in Detroit, he was forced to use TJ Hawkinson, but that was not his go-to. He didn't want to work with the tight ends as much. I think now that when he has Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Deshaun Jackson, so many more, he's going to be using those guys a lot more. He's not going to be looking for Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee is just going to be more of a blocker. He's going to be used in the run game. I don't think that his targets in the passing game, there's not going to be a lot of them. I think that he's just going to be utilized in a very minimal way, and I think that it's going to be the receivers that get a lot of the benefits of having Matthew Stafford. I just don't like Tyler Higbee early on this season.
Yeah, again, I'll talk about the matchup a little bit. Roquan Smith roaming the middle of the field, Eddie Jackson on the safety position, really roaming over the top. The weakness on the Chicago Bears defense right now is at their cornerbacks, and you laid it out already. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Deshaun Jackson, Tutu Atwell. These guys are going to have a field day against the lack of depth that they have at the cornerback position against Chicago. So Tyler Higbee, even if Matthew Stafford wanted to look at him, the wide receivers are going to be too open so far downfield that it's just not going to make sense to dump it off to the tight end. I believe at the end of the day, Tyler Higbee could work out season long, Matt, like you mentioned, but I think in this specific scenario, he is one of those guys that you just want to try to avoid. All right, so that's what we have for week 1 of our fantasy starts and sits. Let us know in the comments down below if that is something that you guys are into as well. Let us know if you have any starts or sits that we might have missed. Matt, thank you for joining us. This is going to be a weekly thing throughout the season, so we'll have Matt, Ian, Frankie. We'll have a rotation of these guys on throughout the show, so you'll get to see them. Go check out their YouTube channel, the Fantasy 4-Pack, and is there anything you want to say, Matt?
No, just like you said, come check out our YouTube. You said you guys should be joining us on there to give us some takes as well. You can also follow us on Twitter at fantasy4pack. You can find all of our socials through that Twitter. And if you've got any questions, shoot them to us, shoot them to them. Like, we love getting questions about what you guys are feeling about certain players, who you want help with. Like, that's the whole thing. It's not just about the draft; it's about your management in the season.
Absolutely. That's where a lot of people lose fantasy. So I appreciate you all for watching. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. We go live every single day. That'll be all. Peace and love.